Hey everybody, let's talk a little bit about our initial exploration of data. Thanks for all the work you've done so far in getting our data entered. Now we're only about halfway, but it's a good time now to begin to start to look at our data and to begin to figure out what some of the questions you might want to explore could be when we complete our full data collection. So I've created an I've cleaned up our existing data. So let me just say that still keep entering your data into our data entry files. I've updated them to be called V2 and V3. These guys are still in place. Keep cranking through that. But in addition to that, we have another pile now inside another folder inside our polls folder, and that's this interim data exploration guy. So I have both a version A and a version B. One of those, as you look at these again, these are just in progress data, not fully QA/QC'd, but good enough to start. And the best place to start with that is just basic, simple summary stats. And they're a really good way to begin to get our arms around what our data look like. So sample size, average, max, min, etc. Now, if we look at poll version A, if you scroll down to the bottom, which is about row 1600 or so, you'll see that we have some of the simple calculations for the summary stats. So this number here, for example, this 787, this would be the number of people that have answered that question so far. And then the 846 was telling me that about 84.6% of the people were correctly able to recognize that water was a thing that they had heard contained plastics. And then for things that have a continuous variable like seafood, the amount of seafood that have been consumed in the past week, this is just a simple mean. So in this case, we have 748 people reported eating seafood, and those folks on average were consuming about 6 1/3 ounces of seafood. Now, you can do this basic summary stats, which is totally cool. And so you can just scroll down to the bottom and see that. And you see that here, for example, in the upper right with our with our notions of safety of seafood from California. And so, for example, this is showing that about 35% of the people think it is that we surveyed, about 24% are neutral, and about 6% don't feel such seafood is safe, and then about a third of the folks surveyed were unsure either way. What we can do is we can expand that. So I've done that down here. And so we can actually say, hey, what is the say summary statistics of this particular group for another set of a truncation or a conditional group of the data? And so that's what I've done here. So what I've done is I'm looking at people here that think California's seafood is safe. For people that say that, how many ounces on average of seafood are they eating? And so what we find is that for folks that said California seafood is safe, they're eating about 9.3 ounces of seafood a week, whereas the neutral folks are eating about 4.6, so about half the amount of seafood. And people in the no camp are about 3 2/3 ounces. Now our poll version B is a little more complicated. While some of the questions are the same style as we've just been discussing, obviously the bulk of the questions on version B are those different impressions of management. And really, that response is much more of a relative. What's most robust there is to compare the amount of support from one particular management action to another. So it's a relative measure there. And so I've summed this up. So manage retreat, for example, how many people have answered that question so far? What's the average value between 2 and -2, excuse me? and so on and so forth. And so what I've done is I have put all those different questions in there, and then I have gone about and done some binning of my own. Now you're welcome to change my binning or introduce your own new bins of data to help us. And so you can see that on the more detailed tab. If we look at the organizing tab, what I've done is I've sucked that data back into the data sheet, and I've actually run the calculations. So for this one, I have the stressors, so pollution, fragmentation, overharvesting, invasive species, and bureaucracy, institutional bureaucracy. And then I have a bunch of themes, which would be the things that are coming up a lot in our surveys, things like climate change, protected areas, fishing, etc. And so with that, for example, if we look at our stressors here, you just see the formula I use to calculate this. And so that's telling us that on average, for folks that said that pollution was a challenge, or for questions that were involving pollution, that on average they were scoring about 0.4 in terms of the positivity of that management action. And the sample size, the count, the number of things that we averaged was pretty large. There was like 19 of our questions fell into the pollution category. And what you can do is, again, you don't have to do this, but one example of the way you can use our data is we can then start to compare them. So that's what I'm showing you here. So we go from the negative to the positive. And what we see is, firstly, we have this bin, plus or minus 0.6. And that is from our Kelisongus, our fake question. That tells us what the background error rate is. And so that's something we cannot distinguish from 0. So if someone said 0.1, we can't tell if that's different than 0, let's say. And so this is that noise window. And then I've calculated the grand mean of each of these groups of responses, and calculate the mean and the standard deviation. And what we see here is some things actually extend beyond that sort of noise layer, that survey instrument error. And what we see is protected areas. Questions about protected areas, management of protected areas, are generally seen as much more positive than other things. Similarly for restoration, things like rare species, coastal access, and how we phrase the question, those guys are all close to being significant. And maybe once we get the rest of the data entered, maybe we'll see they're significant. On the other side, negative stuff, we see that anti-science policies, any policy that's closely associated with the president himself in the last few months, and or things related to disasters, those are generally viewed as pretty negative. I should also say that this guy here, this was just an exploration of the way we phrase the questions. So this was negative. This one on the right, negative, or loss, or reduction, something like that. This guy is neutral, and then this one here, which was almost positive, almost significant. That was stuff where we engaged positively. We added more workers. We brought in more resources, that kind of stuff. So positive framing almost always generates better reaction in these surveys. So you're going to go play around now, and we have the instructions there. You're both going to figure out 4 hypotheses, 2 related to seafood, 2 related to other things, and you're going to create a graph, etc., or a data visualization of each of those to test that hypothesis. Now, you do not need to actually do a rigorous statistical test, but you do need to do some by inspection looking. So if I think that age influences seafood. If that's my hypothesis, a seafood consumption, I want to provide some data either in the form of a figure or a table to actually test that hypothesis if that is true. And all that stuff's here. So in addition to that, in addition to creating 4 hypotheses and then doing the visualization to see if it looks like they could be true or not, we also have this form. So do me a favor and fill out just in text each of the 4 of your falsifiable statements. That'll just help me when I'm going through figuring out what you guys are interested in, rather than me having to copy down all of the results from your PDFs. So you're both going to submit the PDF of the 4 as well as filling out this form. So have fun and enjoy playing around with our data. You guys deserve it.